What's going on, everybody? Cleepus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, of course, as the name suggests, the A13 LTE is the 4G version of the Samsung Galaxy A13 5G, and while we do have an A14 5G now, the Samsung Galaxy A13 4G still doesn't have a successor yet. But despite this, we have seen a decent amount of good 4G phones since this phone originally came out, so we're going to take another look at its specs and features and go over what kind of value it provides in this day and age. Now, as always, if you do want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A13 4G, we're getting a 6.6-inch 90Hz PLS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So honestly, with this phone, the display is really one of the best things about it. Even at this point in 2023, not very many 4G phones in this price range are going to have a 1080p resolution, and it does look really nice. The image is really sharp, the colors look good, the brightness is nice, and even the viewing angles, for what they are at least decent. Now, that being said, if you're outside in the sun or in a really bright area, the phone is still not going to be the easiest to see, but in a more typical setting, in general, this display is going to look really nice. So if you're consuming a lot of content, especially stuff like videos, for example, where the image quality matters a bit more, compared to most phones in this price range, the A13 is going to be a great choice. Aside from the image quality, at 6.6 inches, the display is a little bit larger than average, not really by much, but it definitely is a good size. And with a 20:9 aspect ratio, we are getting a decently tall and narrow form factor, so if you're doing something in landscape mode, like watching a video, for example, things are going to look nice. You're going to get a more immersive experience. And if you're doing something like reading or browsing the web, with a form factor like this, you can fit a good amount of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. So overall, if you're looking for an entry-level phone that has a really nice display, you're definitely not going to go wrong with the Samsung Galaxy A13. Now, when it comes to storage, it's kind of a gray area because on one hand, the phone in my hand does have 64 gigabytes of internal storage, but for what it's worth, I did get it unlocked on eBay before it actually even reached US carriers. And I believe pretty much any version of this phone you get from a carrier is only going to have 32 gigabytes, which in my opinion is definitely not enough space. To give you an idea of what it actually looks like, right now I really don't have a ton of apps on this phone, maybe a few social media apps, some streaming platforms, search engine type stuff, Amazon, a couple games, so really not a lot of stuff. But as you can see, it's all taking up about 45% of the total storage. And again, keep in mind, my version of this phone does have 64 gigabytes. So with only 32, you're really not going to have a lot of space. So keep in mind, on one hand, if you are getting this phone unlocked and you do end up with 64 gigabytes, then I feel like for the average user, this is going to be at least okay. But if you're only getting 32, then unless you're really doing hardly anything with your phone, even with microSD card expansion, I feel like 32 gigabytes is really not enough. And again, if you are getting this phone from a US carrier, you are most likely only going to have 32 gigabytes. So with that in mind, I would say the storage is definitely one of the main drawbacks of this phone, because at this point in 2023, I feel like 32 gigabytes is just not enough storage for anyone. Now, for security features, the Samsung Galaxy A13 does have Face Unlock, as well as a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, so definitely a great spot for it. But real quick, let's go ahead and give it a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too, so definitely nice to have multiple options besides a pin to unlock it. Now, taking a look at the camera setup here, with the Samsung Galaxy A13, up front we got a water drop notch for the selfie camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as camera features go, surprisingly, this phone has pretty much everything. And while it's not really that rare for an entry-level phone to have a bunch of different camera features, not every phone in this price range is going to have an ultra-wide camera. I mean, for that matter, the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G doesn't even have an ultra-wide camera, and that phone is not only newer, but it is, at least in theory, a bit higher end than this one. So overall, if you are looking for a more affordable phone, but you are taking a lot of pictures, and you like to have a bunch of different camera features, then in that case, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is going to be a really good choice. In addition to this, aside from just having these features, I do think that for what it is, the camera quality is actually really good. With a 50 megapixel camera, you can expect to get some great photos, and even with the ultra-wide camera and macro camera, for a more affordable device like this, they do work really well. Now, to give you a quick idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the main camera. So in general, yeah, I was definitely really impressed, considering this is a really entry-level, affordable phone. Being able to take pictures this good is definitely a nice thing. If you're taking pictures for stuff like social media, for example, I do think this phone will get the job done just fine. So in case you were considering spending a bit more and getting a much higher end device just for the camera alone, keep in mind, while a mid-range phone like an A53 5G A13 for example, will technically take better photos. For more casual purposes like social media and stuff like that, for most people, I feel like this camera will be perfectly good enough. So in general, if you like to take a lot of pictures, but you also don't want to spend a ton of money on a higher end phone, then I do think the Samsung Galaxy A13 is a great alternative. Now, as far as performance goes, aside from the storage, that's really going to be this phone's second major drawback. With the Samsung Galaxy A13, we are getting 4GB of RAM with the Exynos 850 processor. And keep in mind, just like with the storage, if you get this phone from a US carrier, I believe you're only going to get 3GB of RAM. Not that it makes a huge difference at this point, I mean, the phone is pretty slow anyway. But again, in case you get this phone expecting 4GB and find out you're only getting 3, just keep in mind that is expected. So in general, again, this is really not a very fast phone. I mean, for just basic activities like light web browsing, occasional social media use, and maybe like watching YouTube videos, for that kind of activity it is going to be at least okay. But if you're going to be on your phone a lot, then you're probably going to be disappointed with how slow it is. So at the end of the day, is it the slowest phone in the world? Maybe not. I have actually seen phones that are a bit slower, but again, if you get this phone expecting really good performance, then you will be disappointed here, because this phone is really not made for heavy activity. Now, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So yeah, in general, this might actually be the slowest phone Samsung makes, even slower than the A03s, which despite not being terrible, doesn't have the best performance either. So again, if you are really going to be on your phone a lot, then I would probably skip this phone. But of course, if you are more of a light user and you're really not going to be using your phone all the time, maybe you're just watching a couple YouTube videos here and there, and you're not really doing any demanding activities like mobile gaming, for example, then in that case, despite this phone being honestly pretty slow for more light use like that, it most likely will at least get the job done. For the battery, like every recent Samsung Galaxy A series phone, the Samsung Galaxy A13 does have a 5000 mAh battery, and it also supports 15-watt fast charging, so you can expect to get great battery life and longevity here. If you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you need your phone to last all day, in that case, getting a phone like this that has a really large battery is going to be a great choice. And in addition to this, not only is this phone going to have really good battery life per charge, but down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, it's not going to wear out nearly as quickly as a much smaller battery. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time, then again, this phone is going to be great for that. In addition to this, the Samsung Galaxy A13 also does support 15-watt fast charging, which on one hand is definitely not the best fast charging, but at the same time, compared to most phones in this price range, for more of an entry-level device like this, you're really not going to do much better anyway. And in my experience, the charging speeds are still at least decent, so I feel like most people are probably not going to have an issue with that. Now, as far as the software goes, this phone does have Android 13, which is definitely good, because at this point in 2023, as of the recording of this video at least, I know it's going to change pretty soon, but as of right now, pretty much the only entry-level phones I've seen so far that actually have Android 13 are Samsung Galaxy A series phones. So that really just goes to show, if you are looking for a more affordable device and you want really good software support, Samsung is really one of the best, if not the best option. In knowing their software support, with this phone you can also expect a few more major updates in the future. So overall, if having the latest version of Android is important to you, then for an entry-level phone, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is one of the best options so far. Now, when it comes to other features, for NFC, this is another kind of gray area, because on one hand, I have actually heard of versions of this phone that do have NFC, but this phone in my hand doesn't, and I kind of want to assume the ones you get through carriers don't either. Now, in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the main technology behind contactless mobile payment services, so if you like to use tap and pay, you will need NFC to do that. Now, this is really too bad, because at this point in 2023, while I want to say maybe about half of the entry-level phones don't have it, we are starting to see a lot more lower-end phones that have NFC, like for example, the Cricket Ovation 2. That phone is around the same price as this phone, pretty much the same kind of tier, and that phone does have NFC. So the point here is, in this day and age, with stuff like tap and pay becoming more and more popular and widely used, I feel like it's more important for a smartphone to have NFC, and it's really becoming more of an expectation. So if you do like to use tap and pay, then again, keep in mind, this phone does not have NFC as far as I know. So if you do want to use that feature, then you will have to get something else. Now, taking a look at the overall design here, it does look pretty decent. Aside from the slightly thicker bottom bezel and the water drop notch up top, the phone does look decently sleek and modern, and overall, I feel like most phones in this price range are going to look pretty much exactly the same, and the A13 is no exception. That being said though, it definitely doesn't look bad, and I do like the back material, even though it has kind of a glossy texture, and you can kind of see fingerprints in certain lighting. I definitely don't think it's too bad. The build quality is also pretty good, and the phone has an okay amount of weight to it. So in general, while it's definitely nothing premium, if you just want to make sure your phone has a decent design, then you're really not going to be disappointed here. But in conclusion, Is the Samsung Galaxy A13 4G still worth buying in 2023? Overall, even with all the newer 4G phones that have been released since this phone was originally launched, I still think for what it is, the Samsung Galaxy A13 LTE is still one of the better options. Now there are two main reasons for this. First of all, again, the display is really nice. While there are 4G phones like the Motorola Moto G Stylus, for example, that have displays that are just as good, if not better, those phones are a little bit more expensive. And for a really cheap entry-level phone, I don't think very many phones, if any in this price range, have a display that looks this good. So if you are going to be consuming a lot of content and you just want something really cheap and affordable, then honestly the Samsung Galaxy A13 is really a perfect option for that. The other thing I really like about this phone is the camera. In pretty much every way, for a phone like this, the camera is honestly pretty much perfect. It has a really powerful main camera, a macro camera, and an ultra-wide camera. And again, in addition to having a bunch of features, the photo quality is really good too. So if you're taking a lot of pictures, then in this price range, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is, again, probably going to be one of the best options. That being said though, the storage, depending on the version you get, and the performance are really the two main drawbacks to think about here. On one hand, if you are more of a light user, or if you get the unlocked version that has 64 gigabytes, the storage isn't really going to be that much of an issue for you. But if you get the US version that only has 32 gigabytes, I do think even if you use a microSD card, with that amount of storage, it's probably still going to be tough. That being said though, compared to most other entry-level phones, I feel like for whatever reason, even today in 2023, most of them still only have 32 gigabytes anyway. So unless you spend a bit more and get something a bit higher end, for this price, you're really not going to do that much better anyway. But in general, if you are looking for a really inexpensive phone that has a really nice display and a great camera setup, then I do think the Samsung Galaxy A13 is still worth considering. Now, once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.